the secret Cold War mission that continues to threaten lives today.
But before we start, please make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the notification bell and smash that like button. We really appreciate your continuous support.
For the second half of the 20th century, the world's fate hung in the balance as the United States and the Soviet Union, the two toughest superpowers, were at odds with one another. As both nations competed in an array of areas, some of their feuds presented a greater danger to their citizens than others. In fact, one of the most nail-biting missions carried out during the Cold War still poses a threat to millions today. On a frosty morning in May 1959, two U.S. Army officers, Colonel John Kirkering and Captain Thomas Evans, found themselves wading through the heavy snow of frosty Greenland. They were taking measurements for a new underground military installation that could potentially make all the difference should the U.S. and USSR engage in an all-out war. In the public eye, Americans' construction project seemed perfectly innocent. After all, the government struck a deal with Denmark in 1960 to begin building the underground facility in Greenland. According to the Pentagon, the facility would be used to test various construction methods in Arctic environments, support scientific research, and develop a semi-mobile nuclear reactor for power. But what was the truth? As it turned out, the nuclear-powered Arctic Research Center in northwestern Greenland was nothing more than a front. America intended to build Camp Century, a secret network of tunnels and missile silos designed to store weaponry in the event that the Cold War escalated. How long could they continue to hold on to the secret? With the 1960s fast approaching, tensions between the US and USSR were reaching a boiling point. As both sides continued to come up with new schemes to strike fear into the other, the United States believed that Camp Century could provide them with a serious advantage, namely the ability to shuffle 600 nuclear-tipped Iceman missiles between 2,100 silos. If successful, the United States would have a military arsenal that could launch almost entirely unpredictable attacks on their Soviet enemies. The issue at hand, however, was the difficulty of beginning construction in what was an extreme climate. In this frosty region, temperatures often reach negative 70 degrees Fahrenheit, with snowfall accumulation being approximately 4 feet per year. What's more, the wind could pick up to a monstrous 70 miles per hour, making construction above the ground near impossible. It was for this reason the U.S. military knew that all construction had to begin underground. With little other choice, the U.S. Army Engineering Corps began excavating 2 miles of tunnels beneath North Greenland's snowy surface. Using enormous rotary tilling machines, they dig large trenches over, which they would later place an arched steel roof. This was just the start of an architectural masterpiece. The tunnels created by the U.S. Army could be used for any number of functions, ranging from workspaces to accommodation and even recreation. What was particularly remarkable about this facility was that it was powered by the world's first ever semi-mobile nuclear reactor. That was just the start. Just 1 year after construction began, Camp Century had grown to span miles of completed tunnels. Included was Main Street, a tunnel 1,100 feet long, as well as numerous barracks facilities, a chapel, a library, a fully equipped gym, and even a movie theater. Within each barracks facility lay a large common area along with 5 individual rooms. In addition to providing a sufficient living space for military personnel, the facility also had expert climate control. Deep holes were drilled into the ice cap, provided a fresh source of cold air, while an air gap was created to minimize melting caused by internal heating. Operations soon got underway, with over 200 soldiers working at the underground base to test the feasibility of military operations in extreme cold. While this was the story that the public was fed, the soldiers also happened to be carrying out a covert operation called Project Iceworm, the storage of 600 specially modified Iceman missiles, as well as the establishment of a nuclear launch pad. With 2,500 miles of tunnels expected to be built in total, just how would the Army transport the Iceman missiles across such a far distance? The solution was to build railroad tracks, a task that also required builders to fortify the tunnels each year. While an uphill battle, this plan could enable the US to pull off their greatest mind game against Russia yet. If fully realized, the extensive operation could see the facility grow to 53,000 square miles, with 11,000 military personnel being required to administer it. As a result, the facility would be equipped with countless hidden locations from which to store and launch missiles. While an invaluable asset in America's struggle against the USSR, Camp Century soon began to experience unavoidable problems. With much of the facility being constructed from wood and steel, experts predicted the facility would last for about 10 years without repairs. What they didn't account for, however, was the unexpected occurrence whereby nearby ice glaciers began moving at a much faster pace than expected. Clearly, emergency measures had to be implemented to save Project Iceworm. In addition to environmental changes, there was another threat to the base's survival. In 1963, the nuclear reactor had to be replaced by diesel generators. 2 years later, the facility was evacuated, and by 1967, the base was abandoned entirely. Suddenly, the America's secret weapon was no more. But that wasn't the end of Camp Century's story. Following the decision to abandon Project Iceworm, the U.S. Army Engineering Corps removed the base's nuclear reactor. There was, however, still nuclear waste left over from the operation. While the Army expected Greenland's icy surface to eventually cover the base's remains, global warming had other plans. It took until 1997 to learn the truth about Project Iceworm, courtesy of a Danish parliament investigation which published documents about what happened at Camp Century. At this stage, it was discovered that soldiers living on the base worried about exposure to radiation, but soldiers weren't the only ones at risk. In 2016, an investigation of Camp Century discovered that as a result of climate change, the ice sheet covering the underground base has been melting at a significant rate. The day that the base is exposed is a day that could put countless lives in imminent danger. Once the base is no longer covered, the large volume of radioactive, toxic, and human waste that remains at Camp Century will put nearby communities as well as the environment in harm's way. Clearly, something needs to be done to prevent this catastrophe. The question is, who'll take responsibility for the vital task? According to experts, the ice layer covering Camp Century could completely disappear by 2090, making cleanup vital. But who'll take it up? While Greenland is a Danish territory, the base is the property of the US. What's more, the defense treaty between the two countries doesn't help resolve the matter. For answers, experts hope they can look towards the past. After all, Camp Century wasn't the only underground complex built because of USSR pressure. Buried in the frosty region of Northern Europe is an underground facility filled with all the infrastructure and supplies needed to sustain a population within its icy tunnels. In the early 1960s, city planners began excavating tunnels through the bedrock beneath Helsinki. While these passages were meant to house power lines and sewers, the excavators soon realized this underground infrastructure could be used for a whole lot more. They jumped at the opportunity. When determining what infrastructure to include in the underground city, those in charge understood that faith was a crucial pillar of many of the residents' lives. As a result, the Tempieliauku Rock Church was built in 1969, complete with an awe-inspiring view that continues to capture the heart of tourists worldwide. The church is an especially popular tourist attraction because of its stunning design, with the entrance here. It's covered by a dome lined with copper and supported by beams, while its walls consist of rock and rubble. At noon, the light from the windows surrounding the roof shines across the floor, creating a mesmerizing sight. But a church wouldn't be enough to entertain the families of an underground city, so the Itäkeskus swimming hall was constructed. This enormous facility can accommodate up to 1,000 guests at a time and can even be converted into an emergency shelter, fitting up to 3,800 people. But what about activities for non-swimmers? To satisfy sports enthusiasts, engineers constructed the Arena Center Hakaniemi Indoor Sports Center. The center consists of 4 indoor courts, with those looking to break a sweat can use for soccer, futsal, handball, and badminton. But the fun doesn't end there. If traditional team sports aren't really your thing, you can enjoy some go-karting at the Formula Center, which is believed to be the only subterranean karting track in the world. For those with small children, the Lekiliola underground playground keeps kids occupied for hours. And what happens when you need groceries? Since the construction of the underground network, visitors can access several shopping centers via various tunnel routes. Because the distance of the tunnels is so extensive, you even have the option of parking your car at one of several convenient underground car parks, an initiative that's helping free up space in the city above ground as well. Of course, the city planners also had to account for essential utilities during the city's development. A local energy company holds a reserve of 35 million liters of water in a closed-off area, while a waste management system also exists to process the waste of approximately 800,000 residents living above ground. While above-ground Helsinki, the capital of the snowy Nordic country of Finland, already bustles with plenty of hotspots, the hidden city draws in plenty of tourists on its own. Visitors often wonder, why did this Finnish city need an underground counterpart? To understand, Finland decided to build an underground network of tunnels below Helsinki. We have to dial back the clock to 1939, when World War II was beginning to take form and the world as it was known was forever changed. At the center of some of the most violent battles was Finland's neighbor. As concerns over devastating attacks by the Germans continued to grow, Soviet Union Premier Joseph Stalin decided it would be a good idea to create a buffer between his nation and Germany. Unfortunately for Finland, their position as Russia's neighbor meant they would soon be pulled into a fight they never wanted. Initially, Stalin demanded that Finland retracts its borders by 16 miles as to create a buffer zone around the Russian city of Leningrad, while also designating several islands as naval bases. While Stalin offered Finland plenty of Russian territory in exchange, the Scandinavian nation was largely suspicious of his motives and turned him down, which didn't sit well with Stalin. On November 30th, 1939, after several failed negotiations, the Soviets invaded Finland with 500,000 troops in what would soon be known as the Winter War. While heavily outnumbered, the Finnish had one enormous advantage: they were fighting on home turf. Led by Marshal Carl Gustaf Mannerheim, the Finnish forces took advantage of their network of trenches, concrete bunkers, and forts in order to maximize their protection. What's more, the Finnish military's guerrilla war tactics in the freezing cold weather effectively wore Soviet troops down, but the Soviet Red Army was far from defeated. Because of the enormous volume of their ground forces, the Soviets sent even more reinforcements into battle. With endless waves of Soviets coming at them, the Finnish eventually ran low on ammunition, while their troops suffered from exhaustion. Finally, the Soviet Union offered Finland a peaceful solution at a heavy price. Left with no other choice, Finland agreed to a treaty that allowed the Soviet Union to take 11% of its territory. In return, Finland could maintain its independence. Later on in the Second World War, Finland and Russia would clash yet again, but this time Finland would deal the Russians a heavy blow. Over 3 months, 300,000 Soviet troops fell in battle, compared to just 65,000 Finns. In fact, it was this clash that made the Germans confident in their ability to successfully invade Russia. Ultimately, they were wrong, as the Allies went on to win the Second World War. While peace may have been restored, a new world conflict soon emerged, leading to even more Finnish security concerns. With Germany's military forces depleted, both the Americans and the Russia raced to become the world's leading superpower. With Europe being split into Eastern and Western blocs, Finland grew increasingly concerned over Russia's increasing influence, particularly given the history of violence between the two countries.